What's up, peeps? I'm back and getting into making coloring videos again. I chose these two lovely books from Amazon, and I went ahead and tested my markers on each of the first pages. I think it's a pretty funny coincidence that they both have very similar bicycles. What I tested was mainly how thirsty the paper is, and as you can see on the left page, the ink does not travel quite as much as the right. As you can see on the left, the line is thinner, and I applied as much pressure on the right, and it did travel a bit more, but that's okay. They are open about this paper and the fact that they used standard paper to save money, and I happen to really appreciate that honesty. It just means when using markers, you may need a lighter hand near the black lines, and it does say in the upper right corner that you can either use colored pencils or alcohol-based markers. So with that said, I'm very excited about this book. Let us begin. I've decided to start our coloring journey in country gardens, and this page I fell in love with because of the variety of flowers. I also really appreciate that the pages are perforated, so you can save your art and frame it if you want to. I have this magical thing here. I'm not quite sure what it's made of, plastic or silicone, I don't know, but it protects the page behind it, which is necessary when using alcohol markers. I'll also add that this is a post-video voiceover, and at some points in the video the focus does go out, and I'm sorry about that. In part 2 the videographer and me comes back and it's much better quality, but this first video is going to be just a teensy bit rough with the focus and shaking and stuff. As you can see that it's a little shaky. It does stop after a few seconds, but it's pretty much every time I hit play the video will shake because the camera is on a gooseneck and it's a little wobbly. To start, I am doing what I call pre-shading, which is where I take a dark gray and I put shadows where shadows will be, and then later on when I lay over the color, it gives a very nice subtle shadow. I do use post shading, I guess you would call it, later on. I kind of vary between pre-shading and post-shading. Pre-shading is when I use the gray like this, and post-shading is when I take, say, a green and then a slightly darker green, and after I put the initial green down, I will go through with the darker green to add shadows, and that gives a really nice natural look too. So it's all preference. I just kind of like the pre-shading for this part here, and then later on when I'm doing all of the leaves I pre-shade as well, but mostly I post-shade with just a slightly darker color than the one I use first. You'll notice here, and in a few other parts of the video, that the alcohol ink travels past the black line. The way to avoid this when you're using paper that's not specifically made for markers is to either have a lighter hand, do lighter strokes, or kind of stop just shy of the black line, because the ink will keep traveling most of the time when you use more pressure. So that's my little trick to avoid that, is to just kind of stop short of the black line. But here I'm not too concerned about it since it's pre-shading. It's not really going to show up too much once I color in everything else. Can't forget the little ladybug shadow here. I'm just making sure that there's no other spots, and I do see that in between the hydrangeas it should be pretty dark. There are a few places in this coloring book I pause because I think the artist forgot to add some details in certain places, and I will explain later on, like spots where there should be black liner still, but there's not. But I'll explain later on, you'll see what I mean. So now we're going to the metal part, and I'm using Cashmere Gray. These are Ohuhu markers, by the way. My husband gifted me with a 216 set for Christmas, and I've been absolutely loving them. Thank you, hubby. I will also be including all the colors and the number codes that I used in the description below. Right here you'll see me just dot the paper because I wanted to see like how fast the color travels. You don't see that dot later on when everything dries. You also notice that I'm very careful around like edges like this, and I change my brush strokes. I actually use a big variety of brush strokes throughout this whole video, not just these nice smooth ones, because I'm trying to be careful around parts that are tiny or the black line's not very thick, and I know the marker will travel if I'm not careful, so that's why I use a variety of brush strokes. The way I figure it, as long as you're keeping your edge wet so that when you do go over it, there are no streaks, or at least minimal streaks. You know, this is coloring, it's supposed to be relaxing, whatever. It gets the job done. So use whatever strokes you like, just keep your edges wet if you don't want streaks. Now I'm going in with the dark brown, and since I did all the pre-shading, I will not be using a darker brown to shade because the shade is already there. And the pre-shade gives the illusion of a darker brown having been used when it hasn't. Now, remember what I said earlier about keeping your edges wet. So here, since it's a larger area, I'm trying to fill it this way, but the edges dry before I get to them, so it ends up very streaky. However, I do a little trick later because it's wood, and I cover it with zigzags and stuff to make it more wood-like, so it kind of does hide the streaks by making more streaks, and you'll see what I mean by that in a bit. So now I just go back through making a bunch of random lines and zigzags because it's wood, and wood, it has like a variety of different colors in it, usually. This probably wouldn't work for something like a sky, but it worked for the wood. So now I'm just going to go through and add another layer of the brown, which will also shade a bit because you can layer alcohol markers and they will get a bit darker with every layer on the knots and the divots and stuff, just to give them a little more dimension. Now I'm coming in with two of my favorite greens in the set, and that's Edamame and Guacamole. Sounds delicious, and it is. And I will be using these on the leaves here, and I will be doing that post shading that I was talking about earlier by laying down Edamame first, and then using Guacamole, which is literally one shade darker, to add those shadows. Again, I am sorry about the focus going out. Whenever I stop my camera from recording, I sometimes forget to refocus it, and it happens a few times throughout this video, so I do apologize about that. You'll notice again that I am using a lot of different little strokes here, only because I'm trying to be very careful not to go outside the lines, as these leaves are tiny. And real quick, I realized that I missed some spots, so I am just filling those in with the dark brown. And now we're going to hit it with the guacamole. Make some nice natural shadows. I know some of them look a bit dark, but what's nice about alcohol marker is as it dries, it gets lighter and it blends just so well. So right here, I am pointing out what I mentioned earlier about the ink lines not seeming complete, because right here under the poppies, there's no lip to the barrel, but on the left there is a lip. So I'm gonna fix that later. Moving on to the ladybug. I used deep vermilion, crimson, and I forgot which gray I used. There are quite a lot in the set, but I believe it was storm gray. And here, because these dots are so small, I'm kind of just dabbing the alcohol ink in, knowing the paper's gonna take it and spread it. It's pretty satisfying, actually. And here I'm coming in with the crimson to add some shadow to the ladybug. I'm also just touching up this dot that I forgot about and letting the ink just bleed into that circle there. And now we're moving on to these hydrangeas. I'm using just flat guacamole for the stems, and then for the flowers I'm using deep periwinkle and lavender for the purples, and cornflower and Havelock blue for the blue flowers. This is cornflower blue. I'm also trying not to color the center of these because I go in with melon yellow later, because I like my hydrangeas with yellow in the center. However, a lot of them do get filled anyway because of the nature of alcohol markers. And for the purple flowers, I've chosen Deep Periwinkle. Now for the darker blue shadows and the flowers that are behind, I am using Havelock blue. And I am using Lavender for the darker purple shades. Here you will see my trusty color swatch chart, and I'm looking for a yellow. I ultimately pick Melon Yellow because it's a nice, dark, vibrant yellow. Now, since the alcohol filled in most of those little white dots, it doesn't show up that well, but I'm still happy with it. If you're very picky with it, you can use something like a gel pen to go over those little dots to make them white again, let it dry completely, and then you can layer your alcohol marker over that if you want a more vibrant yellow. But I am happy with how it turned out for me. Okay, the hydrangeas are done, and as you can see, the colors blended very well with each other. They look nice and dimensional. So now I'm going to focus on these poppies here. There's 5 of them. And I will be using the colors Deep Vermillion for the flower and then Crimson for a little dimension. For the stems, I used yellow-green. These 2 flowers up here are a little difficult because there are some very tiny leaves here, and I do my best not to cover them up, which doesn't go so well, but it's okay. Now we're going back through with the crimson to add some shadows and dimension, and here the focus is really bad, and I'm sorry about that. For these daisies, I decided to go with Corn Yellow and Melon Yellow for the centers, and I tried to use lime juice on the outside. Lime juice, the alcohol marker color, not actual lime juice. I find it funny how some of these marker names are food, but some of them are colors. I actually love that, because I'm a foodie. But you see that I am dotting the corn yellow instead of just filling it in because I want it to look like it has a texture. And now we're going to dot with the darker melon yellow in the very center and then a little bit on the outside just to give it a bit more dimension. Now this is the color Lime Juice, and the reason I did this was because when I was looking at photos of daisies, it almost looks like where the petals meet the middle, there's kind of a yellow-green there. So I was hoping this would convey that, but it doesn't really. I still do it to the other flower just to have it be even and cohesive. And because the petals are actually white, I came in with the palest gray I have, which is Cloud Gray, and just added a little bit of shadowing for the veins and stuff so it looks like they're white petals. Now this little flower is also a daisy, but it's in the background and it's not as detailed, so I'm still going to use some of the colors on it, but just not as detailed. Now these three flowers here are a little difficult to identify. They kind of look like roses, but I'm going to say they're peonies. I'm going to be coloring these using Sakura for the base color and pink carnation for the shading. Now for these little roses here, I really wanted some more color variation, so I decided to make them yellow, and I'm going to go in with lemon chiffon for the base color and banana cream for the shading, and the stems, I believe I used edamame. It looks like I also used Guacamole for the shading. So these guys reminded me of forget-me-nots, so that's what I made them. I'm going to use Robin Egg Blue for the base color and Cotton Candy Blue for the shading. I'm also trying not to fill the center much at all because forget-me-nots have kind of like a yellow center, but then they have a little white and then it blends into the blue, and that's what I try to do here. It's a little difficult with the bleeding, but I do make it work on some of the flowers. So these guys I decided to turn into Indian blanket flowers, which do have a lot going on. I'm going to be using mustard, tomato, and morello cherry. Sounds delicious. And these flowers actually ended up being my favorite out of all of them. I give a thumbs up here because I'm very happy with them. And here is where I'm going to stop this video. This will be part 1, so stay tuned for part 2. And part 2 will be much better filmed because I figured out the zoom and all that. So I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.